You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I love black and white movies. In fact, I prefer black and white over color. I have several reasons for this. I really like the dramatic contrast in the image, and it evokes an era of filmmaking that I really enjoy. While I could go on for a while about why I prefer black and white over color, it's not what I want to talk about in this video. Instead, I want to talk about the history of black and white filmmaking. Why did it continue to be used for so long after color had come along? And why do some directors still choose to use it today? And since I'll be talking about black and white, I'm going to shoot this video in that format. Now, let's get started. You can't discuss black and white film without also discussing color. This is because the transition between the two was not overnight. It was a long, slow process over several decades. Once the first moving images were captured on black and white film, people began right away to find ways to add color to the image. These early attempts were often time-consuming, difficult, and expensive. The technique that ended up being used the most throughout the silent era filmmaking was to dye different scenes a specific color to evoke a certain feeling. Even with these techniques, black and white was still the dominant format during the silent era. It wasn't until the 1930s and the new 3-strip Technicolor process that color slowly started to become a more regular part of cinema. Films like The Adventures of Robin Hood, and most famously, The Wizard of Oz, used this new Technicolor process. However, it was still a very expensive option, so it was reserved for larger and grander productions. Black and white films continued to dominate throughout the 1940s. It wasn't until 1950 that a cheaper alternative for color was created, called Eastman Color. Even with this cheaper alternative for color, black and white was still a more economical option for lower budget films. Because of this, it was still popular with independent and non-American movies. But the other reason why black and white continued to be used was because it did a better job in low light filming conditions. Color film, for the first several decades, required a lot of light to produce a great image. This made it difficult for shooting night scenes. Most filmmakers would shoot day for night. Sometimes these scenes were pretty convincing, while other times not so much.
Oh, I'd like to paint you like that, Jennifer. You look beautiful, glistening in the moonlight.
It also required the camera aperture to be opened up wide. This would allow more light to hit the film, but made it so the image had a shallow depth of field. This gave filmmakers no option if they wanted something in focus in both the foreground and background. Black and white was the answer to both of these problems. It processed light much better, allowing for more flexibility at night. The camera aperture could also be kept narrow, allowing for things to stay in focus in the foreground and background. Eventually, color film became cheap enough to use regularly, and it got better at processing light. By the end of the 1960s, only a small handful of movies were still using black and white film. This small handful was mostly low-budget filmmakers, since black and white was still cheaper to develop. Directors such as Christopher Nolan, David Lynch, and George A. Romero used black and white in their first films for this reason. It also continued to be used in movies for artistic purposes, sometimes to evoke a certain period, or to give specific scenes a distinctive feel. But sometimes directors chose to use black and white simply because they like it. And you know what? I agree with that. Thanks for watching.